Resurrectionist. Noun. 14th century. 1. An exhumer and stealer of corpses. A resurrection man. 2. One who revives or brings back to light again. Hi, hello, and welcome, or welcome back, I suppose. Today we're delving into something weird. It's almost fitting after my last video, given there's a lot of carnival and freak show adjacent stuff in the life of Spencer Black, the subject of today's book. I know I usually look at fiction, but occasionally I love delving into some weird history stuff. Terry Deary has so much to answer for, and while my knowledge on the area isn't huge, I am always happy to learn about the potted history of medicine, especially the Victorian era, where we were at this precipice. On the one hand, we were making incredible advances. On the other, we still had so much to learn, and the ways we were learning about stuff was, really ethical. I find it so interesting. Like, there's a reason surgery rooms are called theatres. We wanted to show off that we were beginning to really understand the human body, but also we were grave robbing, and we're barely starting to wash our hands. So when I saw the book, The Resurrectionist, the lost work of Spencer Black by E.B Hudspeth, and saw what it was about, I knew I had to read it. I don't know how much detail I'm going into with this, but fair warning, this book is grim to say the least. I expected macabre, but Spencer Black was not a sane man by any means, and the ways in which he tried to prove his theories were truly reprehensible. So, read with precaution. But with that being said, let's get into it. And you know how I just whittled on about it being non-fiction? That's a lie. It's an incredibly well done piece of fiction. And I actually had to look that up because, Victorians were up to some weird nonsense. And this spans the sort of end of the Victorian era up to the start of the Edwardian. It's also in America, so that's not really a fair comparison, but I wouldn't know how to the mid to late 19th century up to the early 20th. Anyway, like I said, these people were up to some weird nonsense at this point in time. The narrative voice is the perfect kind of non-fiction bland. It reads like genuine non-fiction. I'm genuinely really impressed by it. I will be going through this with my feelings as I went through the book, thinking this might actually be real. Now listen, I know I'm not the brightest, but it is done so well. I'm not annoyed at having kind of fallen for it. The posters and illustrations I assumed were recreations because they didn't look quite right, but I gave benefit of the doubt, and I know, at least in hindsight, that a lot of this shit wouldn't actually be possible or actually work, but I got worked, okay? Anyway, let's get on to my review. And yeah, like I said, I'm gonna be going over this with my in the moment thoughts type deal, or more akin to that, thinking, oh god, what a terrible apparently real man. So Spencer Black was a doctor, scientist in the late 19th and early 20th century. He I'll go chronologically through his life, just in less detail than the book, so you can experience this how I did. Though I will say, I looked it up at the end of the book thinking, oh, I'll have a little nosy and see if there's anything else about this man, because this is really fascinating and really grim. And that's when I was like, oh, I'll look up some reviews of this to see what other people are saying. And then one review was like, yeah, it wouldn't be unfair for you to assume that this was a real man. And I'm like, oh, right, okay. I mean, thank God, as you will see, but anyway. But we start in his childhood, and his father Gregory was himself a bit of a weirdo. He was an esteemed anatomist, performing dissections for students. Perfectly normal, even if some of the bodies were gained in less than ethical ways. However, he had some of his favourite cadavers preserved, dressed, and propped up in a macabre anthropomorphic display in his office. Hey Greg, don't fucking do that. I'm all for weird, macabre shit being on display, but, like, you're a professional. I know one friend who is watching this taking notes. No, bad. I will get the spray bottle. Put that back. But, also, I don't know if anthropomorphic is right there. I thought anthropomorphic was, like, something that's akin to human, but, like, you know, like an anthropomorphic, like, Mickey Mouse is an anthropomorphic mouse. Like, he's still a anyway. That annoyed me at the time, but I might just be talking out of my backside. And, yes, Big Greg over here was doing some of the grave robbing himself, which, not condonable, obviously, but it isn't all that surprising. The real freak behaviour comes in when he makes the decision to take his 2 young sons with him on these trips. Spencer, who I will usually just call Black throughout this, it's his surname, but given that we've got a lot of different people going on here, Spencer being only 11 at the time, and his older brother, I want to say Bernard, but they're American, so Bernard, being 14. And he says no older than 11 in his journal, so he could have been even younger than that. Like, Spencer turns into a messed up adult, to put it lightly, and my money is on that, starting with Daddy Dearest, though his brother seemed to turn out a little more normal. His mother died during childbirth as well, so his only role model was a grave robber who displayed corpses around his office. Not exactly ideal, though I will say there was beauty in his journal entry when he said, "My mother died delivering birth to me while my father attended. He held my life in one hand and her death in the other." Now, obviously, when I was reading this the first time, I was like, oh, there's like a gothic beauty in that. Like, if this journal is from 1869, then that would make sense. You know, you are going to somewhat replicate the literature that's around you at the time. And then it's like, oh, this is just Hudspeth brilliantly recreating that. But I do think that's very beautiful, that he held my life in one hand and her death in the other is incredibly beautiful in that very macabre and gothic way. His father also passed when he was rather young, just 16, fittingly donating his body for study. I did say before I found that out, because it's like a few pages later that you find out that he did donate it, but I was like, hey, would it be fair game to steal his body? But I guess we needn't find out. And also, no is the answer to that. But Spencer is a medical prodigy at that time of great change I was talking about in the intro. He started his studies at about 15, already making great headway by the time of his father's passing, but also we're at this time in medicine. Sanitation practices were improving. The practice of washing hands or dipping them in carbolic acid was increasingly common, replacing older notions that dried blood on surgeons' hands acted as a sanitary barrier, or that sanitation had no correlation to infection during surgery. I feel like I could be a medical prodigy at that time, for God's sake. Just like hold up a bar of soap. Behold, I'm a medical marvel. Look at how wonderful. These patients are dying less if you just use this. And it's like, things do go well with Black. He's incredible at anatomical illustration, also taking on work from a man called Jean Delane, who was a botanical illustrator, also doing like bug illustrations. I don't know if they come under the same umbrella. He is where he gets really into cicadas, like crickets, cicadas, crickets, that sort of thing. It doesn't come up so much in his freak behaviour, like, outwardly, but this motherfucker loved crickets. He loved them so much, and it's also very, you know, it's obviously, it's about metamorphosis, and a lot of the work that he does sort of links to that, because it's all about human evolution. And he moved on to a ward where they help those with genetic abnormalities, doing surgeries that I'm not sure would have been successful at the time. Like, it was often very successful in this book. It's often very successful as well, but I'm not sure how generally successful these would have been. It's a bit of a red flag for me. I was like, oh, I didn't even know these could have been successful at the time. Maybe this is where this sort of thing started to be put together. There's like talking about one person who had the lobster hands, as they call it, and they perform a surgery on that. I'm not sure about that, but I think it's interesting. But it is on this ward where things start to take a turn. In the fall of 1870, Black published his controversial paper, The Perfect Human. It states that man is merely the sum of his evolutionary parts. Black claimed that humankind has been assembled over time, with occasional pieces added and, more importantly, occasional pieces removed. Unlike the traditionally accepted theories of evolution and natural selection, Black's view stressed that mutations are not accidents. Instead, they are the body attempting to grow what it had once had thousands of years ago. And it's this theory that sets everything else in motion. He could have been an incredible doctor, and instead he went down the insane path of trying to prove his theory. Like, buddy old pal, that's not how that works, and the lengths he goes to so he can prove this is just like, this was not a well man. He gets married. He has, like, over time, he has a few children, a couple of whom don't make it. But Alphonse, the oldest, does sort of come back later, sort of trying to take on his father's work, and also does end up in an insane asylum at one point, which, you know, is probably for the best. I know the asylums were not good places, but were this a current day, it probably would be the right place for him. Despite being an incredible part of the team on this ward, Black works less and less on it. His private studies are beginning to take over. Black speculated that perhaps the human being is not the best result of evolution. Correct, it's crabs. I know that carcinization is a crustacean thing. Non-crabs all try to evolve to become crab. That's just like a non-crab crustaceans all want to become crab. I just think it's funny that there's the idea that, like, everything wants to become crab. Like, every human wants to become crab. Every, like, ape or primate. I know that's, like, the same, but it's not the same thing. Ape is primate. Or like, all mammals want to become crab. All bird want to become crab. All fish. Everything. We all want to evolve to become crab. But then Black heads to a local carnival where he sees a cabinet of curiosities and an exhibition on certain kinds of abnormalities. But the most important feature of this exhibit for Black is the fawn child, the body of a young boy whose legs sort of bent the wrong way and had horn-like growth, so the fawn comparison isn't hard to see, especially in his illustrations of it. And he does a bunch of research on the this child is dead, by the way. It is a corpse, but he tries to get said research published because it totally proves him right. Can't you tell? Like, Black sounded like a fictional character in a different way here. Like, I literally said, if he were part of some gothic horror, he'd likely be proven right in some awful way. But sort of in the mythos of the book, he is a real person who is just deeply troubled and got into some fuck shit. And I do think that's a really interesting way of messing about with this, because this is written in line with a lot of gothic fiction. I think especially American gothic, I'm going to be totally honest. It is an American book, and it's in Philadelphia, which I think geographically is not that far from where Poe was. Hang on, I'm going to do some, I need to find out where Poe was from. Part of me wants to say Massachusetts, but I'm not sure. He was from Boston, Massachusetts. Okay, is Boston near Philadelphia? Okay, it says they're about 271 miles apart. That doesn't mean anything to me. Okay, so they're like 2 states away. There's sort of a New York between Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, but they're still in the same, from what I understand, the same sort of regional area. So that makes sense. That American horror definitely does tend to be featured either like wilderness or that like new city type places, which obviously up north there is often the new city type places. Anyway, where the fuck was I? Yeah, so the research that he tries to put out on the fawn child is, it ruins his reputation completely, and also forever, because of course it does. So he joins the travelling carnival talking about his theories, and also he does talk about his more reputable work with mutations that he did on the ward. And do you know the mermaid story? This is a real story, but as far as I'm aware, it's purported to be a real story. This isn't like this isn't like this. This is meant to be a real story if it's not like somewhat mythologized. But the mermaid story is like there was a traveling carnival or something like that, like a sideshow or something. And they were like, hey, look, we have a dead mermaid. And it was actually just like a sort of dead monkey and a dead fish, and they sort of sewed them together to be like, look, behold, a mermaid. And is there a cat on my chair? There is. Hello, Zelda. Yeah, that's my hand, because I don't want you walking on my laptop, please. Hey, baby. No. Okay, baby. Right. We have a Zelda here. So, yeah. Dead monkey head, sewn on a dead fish body, and they're like, behold, a mermaid. And that's what this motherfucker's doing, was with a bunch of different shit. And because he is his father's son, it's not just him gathering the little animals for grafting. He brings his son with him, Alphonse. Yeah, that's why he goes mental later, I imagine. Because this is all really healthy. What are we doing, Miss Zelda? Why are you staring at me like that? Are you gonna... Careful. Don't press buttons. There's so much space for you to walk. Why do you have to directly go where the buttons are? Where have you moved my fucking page to? Mermaid story. There, I can see where we are. But unlike the mermaid stuff, this man is doing these grafts so he can prove his evolutionary theories. Like, the mermaid thing was an outright scam. They didn't think this was real. It's something they did on purpose. But Black makes this like harpy out of a turkey, and also the actual young child, like dead still, but like it's vile, and it does only get worse. The crowds think it's disturbing, but many are still interested, though a local paper describes him as such. Dr. Black is still disgusting and lacking the decency, manners, and good sense he once had. I think if that were my epitaph, I wouldn't be against it. And it is small creatures in the show at first, and while his show is popular, he's growing unhappy with it. So he begins to work with living tissue. I don't want to quote anything from here. It's really rather unpleasant, and you've got to bear in mind, this was the part of the book. It's like, it's the thing in hindsight where you go, I know this probably isn't possible, but I think you probably could do some weird freak shit similar to this. Like, it's the fact that he didn't go, look, he is an actual living creature. It is just a sort of malformed beast that's dying that ends up coming out of this. I'm sort of like, I mean, it might live for a little bit, but it was the point in where I am glad that I go, oh thank God it's fiction, because it's like, oh, for much of the book, it's like, oh, this is weird but fascinating too. Hey, yo, what the fuck? Like, it became upsetting at this point where Black's brother, wife, and his 2 sons walk into his study, Bear in mind, his youngest son is so young. I believe no older than 6. I believe a little younger than that. Like, there are creatures like those we've seen previously in here. Different animals sewn together, but not all of them are cadavers. Parts of these monstrosities are trying desperately to hold on to life. His brother points out that they're dying, and he's getting Black. Spencer, he's convinced that they're fully alive despite the obvious contrary evidence to these sad little dying creatures. And later his wife comes back to the study and sets it alight, not only shooting Black in the leg but being terribly injured herself in the blaze. The one thing I'll say in Black's defense is that he seemingly worked tirelessly to do what he could to help her, and given his actual medical specialties with the deformities and things like that, he's not a bad person for the job, though she did end up dependent on opium, but it's not necessarily that surprising. And after it sort of just continues in this vein steadily, with him going from town to town. He's traveling the world at this point, but it gets more and more secretive. The only person who hears from him is his brother, and the last thing that happens is he begins but doesn't quite end to publish a book on his work, and then partway through he just leaves and he's never seen again. And it's sort of like after a series of incidents where he ends up disappearing, eventually we are left with a single copy of the Codex Extinct Animalia, which we do get to see, and it's anatomical drawings of the creatures he believes existed, which is really cool. Whoever did the illustrations for this did an incredible job bringing everything together. Like, if you've seen classic anatomical drawings of just like any given animal, it's done like that. So you see the skeletal structure, and then you see the musculature over the top, and then you see half and half and different angles. It's really cool. And also, there is a centaur in there. He goes for 2 rib cages. Apparently, that's like a thing with people talking about how do centaurs work. That they're like, but what about the rib cages? The answer's that he goes for 2, and I believe this little freak. And man, I don't feel bad about having fallen for like thinking that this might have been real. I think it's a super cool concept brought to life so well, and I want to be clear, I didn't find this in like the fiction section, by the way. It was for some reason with graphic novels and manga. It's not a graphic novel, but like, you know, like there is non-fiction told in that way. Something like Persepolis, or like I want to say sort of not true non-fiction, but still telling real stories. Something like Mouse is what I'm thinking. And like I said, this isn't a graphic novel, but my point is that's where I found it. And I was truly disgusted by this book, and I'm now thankful that it's not real. I know there probably were some Victorian freaks out there trying to like do something like this, but I'm glad that Spencer Black isn't one of them. And the illusion is carried so well by the narrative voice. It reads perfectly for the form. It's great stuff. Like I was saying earlier, it's that like non-fiction bland. I don't know how to explain what I mean by that, but it's very matter of fact. There isn't a strong, when I say there isn't a strong narrative voice, I mean there is no opinion here. It's very unbiased, and it's very cool. I love the way it's been done. But next video, I'm set to be talking about a bunch more Junji Ito, because apparently I've been in a spooky mood as of late. I guess Halloween stuff is starting to show up, and that means that my body is like starting to feel it, and the weather's been getting worse. So apparently today it's decided to be really sunny again. But yeah, if you want to hear more about that, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, feel free to put the notifications on, and all that other cringe stuff I'm supposed to ask you to do. Let me know what books you're reading to get into spooky season, and let me know if you've ever fallen for something like this. I feel like I've been War of the Worlds, if that makes sense. I feel like I've heard the radio broadcast and believed that the world is ending because Martians are coming to get us. But I have been, I would be rather, interested to see if any fake non-fiction has ever gotten to you. Most importantly, though, I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, a wonderful whenever you are watching this. Take good care of yourself. Right.